You wake up on Christmas Eve, 1692. Not to magic. Not to wonder. Not to the warm glow of candlelight reflecting off hand-carved toys and the laughter of rosy-cheeked children. You wake up to silence. The kind of silence that makes you wonder if you've gone deaf. The kind that presses against your eardrums like cotton soaked in ice water. Outside, snow falls in Salem, Massachusetts. Not the picturesque, Hallmark card snow, but the aggressive, suffocating kind that buries roads and seals doors and makes you wonder if spring is just a lie your grandmother told you to stop crying. Inside the workshop, it smells like leather and failure. You are Hans Gottfried, and you are a cobbler. Not a magical one. Not even a particularly good one. Your shoes are functional, which in 1692 is the highest compliment anyone will give you before they haggle you down to 3 shillings and complain about the stitching. You are 28 years old, unmarried, unremarkable, and so profoundly tired that your bones ache even when you're lying down. Tonight, you were supposed to finish a pair of children's boots. You didn't. Instead, you fell asleep at your workbench, face first in a pile of leather scraps, drool pooling on the oak surface like some kind of artisan humiliation. The candle you lit 4 hours ago has burned down to a stub. The fire in the hearth has collapsed into embers. The boots, tiny, unfinished, sad, sit beside your right elbow, mocking you. This is not a story about Christmas magic. This is a story about what happens when you're so exhausted that reality starts to crack at the edges. And through those cracks, legends are born. Because here's the thing about 1692. It's not a good year to be weird. Salem is still twitching from the witch trials that ended just months ago. 19 people hanged. 1 pressed to death under stones. Dozens imprisoned. The entire colony vibrating with paranoia, suspicion, and the kind of collective madness that makes you check your neighbor's woodpile for evidence of Satan. You don't talk about strange dreams here. You don't mention odd occurrences. You certainly don't admit that sometimes, late at night, you hear footsteps in your workshop when no one else is home. But you do hear them. Tonight you hear them again. Tap, tap, tap. Small, rhythmic, precise. You lift your head from the workbench, groggy, disoriented, your cheek embossed with the texture of leather like some kind of artisan stigmata. The workshop is dark except for the dying glow of the hearth. The air tastes like smoke and old sweat and the vague metallic tang of snow seeping through the cracks in the walls. Tap, tap. It's coming from behind you. You turn slowly, neck cracking, and see nothing. Just shadows. Just the skeletal shapes of your tools hanging on the wall. Awls, hammers, all of them perfectly still. The boots are still on the table. The door is still bolted. The windows are frosted over, opaque, useless. And yet, the sound continues. Tap, tap. You stand up, legs shaking, and walk toward the sound. It's coming from the corner of the room, near the shelf where you keep the scraps. The leftover bits of leather too small to use, too expensive to throw away. You reach the shelf and crouch down, squinting into the darkness. Nothing. But when you stand up and turn back toward the table, the boots are finished. Not almost finished. Not halfway done. Finished. Stitched, polished, laced, perfect. The kind of perfect you've never achieved in your life. Not even when you were fully awake and trying. The leather gleams in the dim light like it's been kissed by something divine. The stitching is so precise it looks like calligraphy. The solace are flawless. You stare at them. Your hands are shaking. You look around the room again, slowly, carefully, expecting to see someone, a customer, a thief, a hallucination. But there's no one. Just you, just the boots, just the silence pressing down like a hand over your mouth. And then you notice something else. On the workbench beside the boots, there are footprints. Tiny ones, no bigger than your thumb. Pressed into the leather dust like something small and deliberate walked across the surface, inspecting your work, fixing your mistakes, and then vanished into the air like smoke. You don't breathe. You don't move. You just stand there, staring at the prints, feeling the cold creep up your spine like fingers made of ice, because you know what this means. You know what people will say. And you know, with absolute certainty, that you can never, ever tell anyone what just happened. But here's the problem. You're not the only one who knows. Someone is watching. Someone always is. And this boring, quiet, utterly unremarkable Christmas night in a cobbler's workshop in Salem, Massachusetts. This is the moment the first elf is born. Not in folklore, not in myth, not in some ancient European legend passed down through generations of oral storytelling. Right here, right now, in the suffocating silence of a Puritan colony still drenched in blood and fear. And you, Hans Gottfried, exhausted, unremarkable, terrified, are about to become the secret foundation of a story that will outlive you by centuries. If this feels too real, subscribe before it gets worse, because it does. Morning comes like an accusation. Gray light filters through the frosted windows, turning the workshop into a cold, colorless tomb. You haven't slept. You've been sitting at the workbench for 6 hours, staring at the boots, waiting for them to vanish or explode, or do something that proves you didn't lose your mind. They don't. They just sit there. Perfect. Mocking. Real. The footprints are still there too, preserved in the leather dust like evidence at a crime scene. You've measured them 3 times with your thumb. Each print is roughly 1 inch long, 5 toes, a heel. Perfectly proportioned, not animal tracks, not insect marks. Not anything you can explain without sounding like someone who should be chained to a pillar in the town square and pelted with frozen vegetables. You consider burning the boots. You consider burning the entire workshop. Instead, you wrap them in cloth, tie them with string, and deliver them to the customer as planned. Her name is Goodwife Mather, no relation to the famous Cotton Mather, but she loves to imply otherwise. She's a thin woman with a sharp face and sharper opinions, the kind of person who inspects everything you do with the enthusiasm of someone hoping to find heresy. When you hand her the boots, she unwraps them slowly, deliberately, her mouth already forming the shape of a complaint. Then she stops. She stares. She runs her fingers over the stitching, testing the leather, bending the solace. Her expression shifts from suspicion to confusion to something that might be awe if she wasn't constitutionally incapable of feeling it. These are... She pauses. These are well made. It's the closest thing to a compliment you've ever received from her. She pays you. Full price. No haggling. You take the coins, nod, and leave before she can ask questions. But as you walk home through the snow, you feel it. The weight of being watched. Not by her, by something else. Something small and silent and impossibly present. You glance over your shoulder. Nothing. Just footprints in the snow. Yours. Alone. But when you get home and check the workshop, there's something new on the table. A second pair of boots. Also finished. Also perfect. You didn't start them. You didn't touch them. They weren't there when you left. Your heart is a drum. Your hands are ice. Your mind is a door that's been kicked open and won't close. Because now you have a choice. You can tell someone, the pastor, the magistrate, your neighbor who believes the devil lives in acorns. You can confess that something is entering your workshop at night and completing your work with inhuman precision. You can admit that you're either cursed, blessed, or insane. Or you can keep your mouth shut. You can take the boots to another customer. You can accept the help. and you can become complicit in whatever this is. This is the moment where legends diverge from reality. In the stories, the gobbler is grateful, humble, innocent. He accepts the help of the mysterious creatures with childlike wonder and never questions their motives. But you're not in a story. You're in 1692 Salem. And here, gratitude gets you hanged. So you do what any reasonable person would do. You set a trap. Not a violent one. You're not trying to catch the thing. You're trying to see it. To confirm it exists outside your own deteriorating mind. That night, you stay awake. You position yourself in the corner of the workshop, hidden behind a stack of crates, with a clear view of the workbench. You don't light a candle. You don't make a sound. You just wait. Hours pass. The cold seeps into your bones. Your eyelids grow heavy. Your breath comes out in clouds that hang in the air like ghosts. And then, just as you're about to give up, you hear it. Tap, tap, tap. Your eyes snap open. The workbench is still empty. But the sound is real, close, rhythmic. And then you see it. Not a creature, not a spirit, not some fantastical imp from a children's story. A child, a boy, no more than 8 years old, dressed in rags so filthy they've become part of his skin. His hair is matted, his face is gaunt. His hands are small and quick and impossibly skilled as they move across the leather, stitching, shaping, finishing the boots with the precision of a master craftsman. He works in silence. He doesn't sing. He doesn't hum. He doesn't smile. He just works. And when he's done, he wraps the boots carefully, places them on the table, and turns toward the door. That's when you step out of the shadows. The boy freezes. His eyes, huge, dark, animal, lock onto yours. For a moment, neither of you moves. And then he runs, not toward the door, toward the wall. And he vanishes. Not through a crack, not through a window. He just steps into the shadow and disappears like he was never there at all. You stand there, alone, staring at the empty space where he was. Your mind is a broken clock. Your reality is a house with no foundation. Because now you know, the elf isn't magic. It's a child. A starving, desperate, impossibly skilled child who's been sneaking into your workshop to survive. And the legend that will define American Christmas folklore for centuries? It starts here, with a lie. You don't sleep for 3 days. Every time you close your eyes, you see him, the boy, the shadow, the impossible vanishing act. You replay the moment over and over, dissecting it like a corpse, looking for rational explanations that refuse to appear. Maybe there was a hidden door. Maybe the shadows played tricks. Maybe you've been inhaling too much leather dust and your brain is rotting from the inside out. But the boots are real. The stitching is real. The footprints are real. And so, you conclude, is the boy. The question is, who is he? Colonial Salem doesn't have many mysteries. It's a small, suffocating community where everyone knows everyone's sins. Debts and bloodlines going back 3 generations. A child doesn't just appear out of nowhere. Children belong to families. Families belong to the church. The church keeps records with the obsessive precision of people who believe God is watching and taking notes. So you do what any reasonable person would do. You start asking questions. Carefully. Quietly. Wrapped in the kind of casual conversation that doesn't raise suspicion. You ask Goodwife Mather if she's seen any strange children in town. She looks at you like you've suggested witchcraft and changes the subject. You ask the blacksmith if he's noticed anyone unusual lurking near the workshops at night. He grunts and tells you to stop leaving your door unbolted. You ask the pastor, a dried-up man named Reverend Wolcott, who smells like old paper and theological certainty, if there are any orphans or runaways in the area. He pauses, Just for a second. But it's enough. Why do you ask? His voice is thin, careful. The kind of tone people use when they're deciding whether you're dangerous. No reason. You say, just wondering. He stares at you for a long moment, then leans in close. His breath smells like communion wine and decay. There are no orphans here, Hans, he says. And if there were, they'd be in the care of the church. Do you understand? You nod. You understand perfectly. There are no orphans. Which means the boy isn't supposed to exist. That night, you leave the workshop door unbolted. You set out a piece of bread and a cup of water on the table. Not a trap, an offering. You position yourself in the same corner, hidden, waiting, your heart hammering so hard, you're surprised it doesn't echo off the walls. Hours pass. The candle burns down. The fire dies. And then, just after midnight, the door creaks open. The boy slips inside like smoke. He's smaller than you remembered. Thinner. His clothes are little more than strips of fabric held together by dirt and desperation. His feet are bare, blackened with frostbite. His hands shake as he reaches for the bread. He eats like an animal, fast, desperate. Glancing at the door every few seconds, like he expects God himself to burst through and drag him to hell. When he finishes, he drinks the water in 3 gulps, then wipes his mouth with the back of his hand and turns toward the workbench. That's when you step out. Wait. The boy spins around, eyes wide, body already coiling to run. I'm not gonna hurt you, you say, hands raised. I just want to talk. He doesn't move. Doesn't speak. Just stares at you with the kind of primal distrust that comes from a lifetime of being hunted. What's your name? You ask. Silence. Where do you live? Silence. Who taught you to make shoes? For the first time, his expression shifts. Not into words. Into something deeper. Pain. Memory. Loss. And then he speaks. His voice is small, broken, barely audible. My father. 2 words. That's all he gives you. But it's enough. Because now you know, this boy isn't a runaway. He's not an orphan wandering the streets. He's a ghost. The remnant of something, someone erased. And the reason no one in Salem will acknowledge his existence is because acknowledging him would mean acknowledging what happened to him. And in 1692, silence is safer than truth. You kneel down, slowly, carefully, until you're at his eye level. You can stay here, you say. I won't tell anyone. He looks at you like you're lying. You probably are. But for now, in this moment, in this freezing workshop that smells like leather and desperation, you make a choice. You become complicit, not in magic, in survival. And that choice, that quiet, unremarkable decision to hide a child who isn't supposed to exist, is the seed of every helpful elf story that will ever be told. Because here's the truth about folklore. It's not magic. It's cover. It's the story people tell to avoid the story they can't. And the boy standing in front of you, shivering and silent and impossibly skilled. He's not an elf. He's a secret. And secrets, in the right hands, become legends. His name is Thomas. Or at least, that's what he tells you. You suspect it's a lie. Not a malicious one. Just a practical one. In 1692, names are dangerous. They appear in records, registries, testimonies. They tie you to a history you might need to erase, so you don't push. You let him be Thomas. And in return, he lets you be someone who doesn't ask questions. For the first week, he barely speaks. He appears at night, eats whatever scraps you leave out, completes whatever work is on the bench, and vanishes before dawn. You never see where he goes. You never hear him leave. He moves through the workshop like he's made of mist, touching nothing, leaving no trace except the finished shoes and the faint smell of cold air that lingers after he's gone. But slowly, carefully, he starts to trust you. It begins with proximity. One night, instead of hiding in the corner, you sit at the table while he works. You don't speak. You don't watch him directly. You just exist in the same space, occupying the same silence, proving that you're not a threat. He doesn't run. The next night, you ask him a question. Where did you learn to stitch like that? He doesn't answer immediately. His hands keep moving, needle flashing in the candlelight, pulling thread through leather with the kind of rhythm that only comes from years of practice. Finally, he speaks. My father was a cordwainer, not a cobbler. The distinction matters. Cobblers repair shoes. Cordwainers make them from scratch. It's a prestigious trade, the kind that requires apprenticeship, guild membership, social standing. The kind of trade that doesn't produce barefoot children hiding in workshops. Where is he now? You ask. Thomas doesn't answer, but his hands stop moving, just for a second. Then he continues, faster now, like he's trying to outrun the question. You don't ask again. Over the following weeks, you learn his patterns. He arrives around midnight. He eats first, always quickly, always watching the door. Then he works for exactly 3 hours, producing shoes with a speed and precision that would make master craftsmen weep with envy. He never makes mistakes. He never wastes material. He works like someone who learned the trade, not through formal education, but through survival. And slowly, piece by piece, you start to understand. Thomas isn't just skilled. He's trained. Someone taught him. Deliberately. Expertly. The way a father teaches a son, passing down not just technique but philosophy, the unspoken knowledge that turns craft into art. But something went wrong, because fathers don't let their sons freeze in workshops. They don't let them vanish into shadows. They don't let them become ghosts. One night, after he finishes a particularly complex pair of riding boots, you take a risk. You're better than I am, you say. He looks at you, surprised. You're better than anyone I've ever seen. You continue. If you weren't, hiding, you'd be in a guild. You'd have your own shop. You'd be wealthy. His expression hardens. I can't, he says. Why not? Silence. Then, finally, they killed him. The words hang in the air like smoke. You don't breathe. You don't move. You just wait. And slowly, haltingly, like pulling teeth from a corpse, Thomas tells you the truth. His father was a cordwainer. A good one. Successful. Respected. But during the witch trials, someone accused him. Not of witchcraft, of something worse. Of harboring Catholic sympathies. Of secretly practicing the old faith. Of teaching his son papist prayers while they worked. It was a lie. But in Salem, lies don't need to be true. They just need to be loud. Thomas's father was arrested, tried, and executed. Hanged in the same square where the witches died. His property was seized. His workshop burned. His wife, Thomas's mother, died of fever 3 weeks later. And Thomas? Thomas was supposed to be sold into indentured servitude, but he ran. He's been running ever since. And the only reason he's still alive is because he's invisible. A shadow, a ghost. A boy who doesn't exist in any record, any ledger, any church registry. A boy who learned to survive by becoming the thing people tell stories about instead of the thing they see. You sit there, processing this, feeling the weight of it settle on your chest like stones, because now you understand. The elf isn't magic, it's trauma. It's a child so thoroughly erased by violence that he's learned to live in the gaps between reality and perception. And the legend you're accidentally creating? It's not about wonder. It's about invisibility. It's about how easily people accept fantasy when the truth is too uncomfortable to acknowledge. You look at Thomas, small, shivering, impossibly skilled. You can't stay like this forever, you say. He looks at you with eyes that are far too old for his face. I know, but neither of you knows what comes next. Because the problem with invisibility is that it only works until someone looks too closely. And someone is about to look. Her name is Abigail Dane. She's not from Salem. She's visiting from Boston, a wealthy widow with sharp eyes and sharper instincts. The kind of woman who notices things other people miss because she spent her entire life learning to read runes, contracts, and lies with equal precision. She orders a pair of women's boots. Custom, expensive, detailed. You take the commission because you need the money and because you're confident that Thomas can handle it. He's been working with you for 2 months now. His presence has become routine, familiar, almost comfortable. You've started leaving him better food, warmer clothes. You've even cleared a space in the back of the workshop where he can sleep if he needs to, though he rarely does. He still vanishes before dawn, slipping back into whatever hidden corner of the world he occupies during the day. You don't know where. You don't ask. But you started to think of him as something close to an apprentice, a partner, a secret you're protecting instead of just hiding. It feels, for the first time in your life, like you're doing something that matters. Then, Abigail Dane comes to collect her boots. She arrives early. Too early. You're still half asleep, stumbling through the workshop, when she knocks on the door with the kind of authoritative rhythm that makes you straighten your spine before you even see her face. You open the door. She's tall, composed, dressed in black wool and silver brooches. Her hair is pinned so tightly it looks painful. Her expression is neutral, pleasant, utterly unreadable. "Gugman Gottfried," she says. "I've come for my boots." You nod, turn toward the workbench, and freeze. The boots are there, finished, perfect, gleaming. But beside them, on the dusty surface of the table, are footprints. Small ones. You should have cleaned them. You should have thought about this. But you didn't. And now Abigail Dane is stepping into the workshop, her eyes sweeping across the space with the precision of someone conducting an inventory. She sees the boots. She sees the footprints. Her expression doesn't change. She walks to the table, picks up the boots, examines them with the same careful scrutiny she'd used to inspect the contract. She tests the stitching, bends the leather, checks the solace. Then she looks at you. "These are remarkable," she says. "Thank you." Too remarkable. Your stomach drops. She sets the boots down gently, then runs her finger through the dust on the table, tracing the outline of one of the small footprints. "You have help," she says. It's not a question. You don't answer. She looks at you, and for the first time, her expression shifts. Not into anger, into curiosity. "I won't report you," she says. You don't believe her. "But I want to know," she continues. "Who is it?" Silence. She waits. You feel the walls closing in. Feel the weight of every choice you've made over the past 2 months collapsing onto your shoulders. You could lie. You could refuse. You could throw her out and bolt the door and pray she doesn't go straight to the magistrate. But something in her face stops you. She's not threatening you. She's offering something. What? You don't know. But you take the risk. "A boy," you say quietly. "An orphan. He's been helping me at night." "Where is he now?" "I don't know." She studies you for a long moment, then nods slowly. "Show me the rest of his work." You hesitate, then pull out the other boots Thomas has made. Dozens of pairs now. Each one flawless. Each one proof of his impossible skill. Abigail examines them one by one, her expression unreadable. Finally, she speaks. "This boy," she says, "he's not an orphan, is he?" Your heart stops. He's someone's son. Someone trained. Someone who was supposed to have a future. You don't answer. You don't have to. She sets down the boots and looks at you with an expression that might be pity or might be something colder. Do you know what you're doing? She asks. I'm helping him survive. No, she says. You're creating a story. You don't understand. She leans in, voice low, deliberate. People are already talking. About the cobbler whose shoes are suddenly perfect. About the workshop where miracles happen at night. About the mysterious helper no one sees. Your blood turns to ice. You think you're protecting him, she continues. But you're not. You're turning him into folklore. And folklore, Gudmund Gottfried, doesn't protect anyone. It just makes them easier to hunt. She picks up her boots, pays you double the agreed price, and walks to the door. Before she leaves, she turns back. If you care about this boy, she says, you'll send him away. Far away. Before the story becomes bigger than he is. Then she's gone. And you're left standing in the workshop, alone, with the weight of her words pressing down on you like a coffin lid. Because she's right. You've been so focused on keeping Thomas hidden that you didn't notice what you were creating. A legend. A myth. A story people are starting to tell. And in 1692 Salem, stories are more dangerous than truth. Because truth can be denied. But stories? Stories. They mutate. They take on lives of their own. And once they start, they can't be stopped. You look at the empty workshop, at the perfect boots, at the tiny footprints in the dust. And for the first time, you realize you haven't been saving Thomas. You've been burying him. In legend, where he'll never be found, and never be real again. Thomas doesn't come that night, or the next, or the next. For 3 days, the workshop stays empty. The workbench accumulates dust. The leather scraps pile up. The unfinished boots sit exactly where you left them, accusing you with their incompleteness. You tell yourself he's fine. You tell yourself he's just being careful. You tell yourself that Abigail Dane's warning was paranoia, that no one is actually talking, that the story she mentioned is just her imagination running wild. But on the 4th day, you hear it. You're at the market, buying thread, when you overhear 2 women talking. Heard about the cobbler on Mill Street. The German one? That's him. They say he's got one of the little folk helping him. Your hands freeze on the spool of thread. Little folk? You know, like in the old stories. Brownies. Elves. My grandmother used to talk about them. Creatures that help craftsmen at night in exchange for food. That's papist superstition. Maybe. But his shoes are perfect now. My husband bought a pair last week. Said they're the finest he's ever worn. Well, I'm not buying anything made by devils or fairies or whatever's lurking in that workshop. They walk away, still talking, their voices fading into the market noise. You stand there, frozen, feeling the world tilt sideways. They know, not the truth, but something worse. A version of the truth that's been stretched, distorted, filtered through fear and folklore until it's become something unrecognizable. Something magical. Something impossible. Something that makes Thomas not a child, but a creature. You abandon the thread and run back to the workshop. The door is still locked. The windows are still shuttered. Everything looks exactly as you left it. But when you step inside, you know immediately that someone's been here. Nothing is missing. Nothing is broken. But the air feels different, disturbed, like someone's been breathing in it. You search the space frantically, checking every corner, every shadow, every possible hiding place. And then you see it. On the workbench, written in leather dust, 2 words. They know. Your heart stops. You spin around, searching for Thomas, but he's not there. The message is the only proof he came at all. And then you hear footsteps outside. Not one person. Several. Voices, low, urgent. You move to the window, peer through a crack in the shutters. 4 men stand outside. You recognize two of them, Josiah Hawley, the magistrate's assistant, and Samuel Pierce, a deacon at the church. The other two are unfamiliar, but their posture tells you everything you need to know. They're not here to buy shoes. You watch as Josiah Hawley points at your door, saying something you can't hear. Samuel Pierce nods, then makes the sign of the cross, ironic, given how much this colony hates Catholicism, as if blessing himself before entering a den of demons. They're going to search the workshop. They're going to look for evidence. And if they find Thomas, or worse, if they find proof that he's been here, they won't see a child. They'll see a familiar, a devil servant, proof that you've been trafficking with dark forces. Your mind races. You have minutes, maybe less. You look around the workshop desperately. The finished boots, the tools, the leather scraps. And there, in the corner, tucked behind a stack of crates, a small blanket you gave Thomas last week. Evidence. You grab it, shove it into the fireplace, and light it. The wool catches immediately, filling the room with thick, acrid smoke. The footsteps outside stop. Then, rapidly, they approach. Someone pounds on the door. Goodman Gottfried. Open in the name of the magistrate. You don't move. You can't, because if you open that door, they'll see the smoke. They'll ask questions. They'll search. And even though you've burned the blanket, even though there's no sign of Thomas, they'll find something. They always do. That's how witch hunts work. The pounding continues. Gottfried, we know you're in there. You look at the burning blanket, at the smoke curling up the chimney, at the perfect boots on the table, and you make a choice. You walk to the door. You open it. You face the four men with smoke billowing out behind you like you're emerging from hell itself. Can I help you? You ask. Josiah Hawley looks past you into the workshop, his nose wrinkling at the smell. We've received reports, he says, of strange occurrences in your workshop. Strange how? Unnatural craftsmanship. Work completed impossibly fast. Evidence of assistance. He says the last word like it tastes foul. I work hard, you say. That's all. At night? Sometimes? Alone? You don't hesitate. Always. Samuel Pierce steps forward, his eyes narrow and cold. Let us see. It's not a request. You step aside. They enter the workshop like soldiers entering enemy territory, spreading out, examining every surface, every shadow. One of them kicks at the crates in the corner. Another runs his hand along the workbench, checking for what? Demonic residue? Josiah Hawley picks up one of the finished boots, turns it over in his hands. This is exceptional work, he says. Thank you. Too exceptional. There it is. The accusation wrapped in compliment. He sets down the boot and looks at you directly. People are saying you have help, the kind that doesn't come from God. People say a lot of things. Are you denying it? I'm saying I work alone. Then you won't mind if we search. They do. Thoroughly. Ruthlessly. They tear through your supplies, inspect your tools, even check the chimney. They find nothing, because there's nothing to find. Thomas is gone, and the only evidence he was ever here is smoke, legend, and a message written in dust that's already been destroyed by their boots. Finally, after what feels like hours, Josiah Hawley straightens up, brushing dust from his coat. We found nothing, he admits, though his tone suggests this is somehow your fault. Samuel Pierce looks disappointed. The other two men exchange glances, uncertain whether to be relieved or suspicious. However, Hawley continues, stepping closer. The rumors persist. And in times like these, rumors are as dangerous as truth. Perhaps more so. I can't control what people say. No. But you can control what you do. He pauses, letting the weight of his words settle, I suggest you work during the day from now on, in plain sight, where witnesses can attest to your methods. It's not a suggestion, it's a warning. I understand, you say. They leave, finally, trailing suspicion behind them like smoke. You close the door and lean against it, your legs shaking, your heart hammering so hard you can taste it in your throat. The workshop is destroyed. Your supplies are scattered. Your reputation is now marked with a stain that will never fully wash out. But Thomas is safe, for now. You look at the workbench, at the space where his message was, now obliterated by official boots, and you realize something that makes your blood run cold. Abigail Dane was right. You haven't been protecting Thomas. You've been turning him into myth. And myths, once started, devour the truth. The helpful elf story is already spreading, already mutating, already becoming something bigger than a scared child hiding in workshops. It's becoming magic, wonder, Christmas folklore. And somewhere out there, in whatever shadow he's hiding in now, Thomas is becoming less real with every retelling. Less a boy, more a story. Until one day, he'll be gone completely. Not dead, just erased. Replaced by the legend of what people wanted him to be. You sink onto the bench, surrounded by wreckage, and for the first time since this all began, you understand the true horror of what you've done. You didn't save him. You immortalized him. And immortality, you're learning, is just another word for death. 3 weeks pass. The workshop returns to normal, or what passes for normal now. You work during the day, slowly, visibly, making sure anyone who passes can see you hunched over the bench, struggling with stitches that used to flow effortlessly when Thomas was here. Your shoes are mediocre again. Customers notice. Some complain, others simply stop coming. The magic is gone, which is exactly what you intended. You're trying to kill the story, starve it, prove through sheer incompetence that there was never anything supernatural happening here. Just a cobbler having a lucky streak that's now ended. It's working. Slowly. The whispers are dying down. The suspicious glances are fading. Even Samuel Pierce has stopped loitering near your workshop, disappointed that you've turned out to be exactly what you claimed, ordinary. But at night, alone, you wonder where Thomas is. You wonder if he's warm, if he's eating. If he's alive, you leave food out anyway. Every night. Bread, cheese, dried meat when you can afford it. You unlock the door before you sleep. You create opportunities for him to return. He never does. Until tonight. It's December 23rd, 1692. 2 days before Christmas. The workshop is dark, except for the dying embers in the fireplace. You're half asleep on the bench, wrapped in a wool blanket, when you hear it. Tap, tap. Your eyes snap open. The room is still, silent. Then you see him. Thomas is standing in the doorway, a shadow among shadows. He's thinner than you remember. His clothes are worse. His face is hollow, gaunt, aged beyond his years. But he's alive. Thomas, you breathe. He doesn't move, doesn't speak. Just stands there, looking at you with eyes that hold something you can't name. Fear? Gratitude? Goodbye? Come in. You say, please. It's safe now. They've stopped watching. I know, he says quietly. His voice sounds different, older. I've been watching too. He steps inside, closing the door behind him. But he doesn't approach the workbench. He stays near the exit, like an animal ready to bolt. I'm leaving, he says. The words hit you like stones. What? Where? Away, out of Massachusetts. Maybe New York, maybe farther. Thomas, you can't just... I have to. His voice is firm now, carrying a certainty that sounds wrong coming from someone so young. You know why. You do. The story has grown too big. Even with your attempts to dismantle it, the legend of the cobbler's mysterious helper has spread beyond Salem. You've heard it repeated in neighboring towns, embellished with details you never witnessed. The helper who speaks in rhymes, who disappears in puffs of smoke, who demands payment in cream and honey like some creature from a fairy tale. None of it is true. All of it is believed. And the more people believe, the more dangerous it becomes for a real child to be connected to it. I'm sorry, you say. I never meant, I know. He cuts you off not unkindly. You tried to help. You did help. I would have frozen without you, but I can't be a story. He looks at you with those two old eyes. Stories aren't real, and I need to be real. He's right. You know he's right. But it doesn't make it easier. What will you do? You ask. He shrugs. Find work. Change my name again. Stay invisible. You're too skilled to stay invisible. Then I'll be less skilled. He says it simply, like he's already accepted this future. I'll make bad shoes. I'll be forgettable. I'll survive. There's a finality in his tone that tells you arguing is pointless. So instead, you stand up and walk to the workbench. You open a drawer and pull out a small leather pouch. Inside, every coin you've earned from the shoes Thomas helped make. It's not much. Maybe enough for 2 months of food and shelter if he's careful. Take this, you say, holding it out. He stares at the pouch but doesn't move. I can't. You can. You earned it. If I take it, I'm accepting payment. And if I accept payment, I'm admitting I was here, that I helped you, that the story is true. You understand immediately. As long as he was invisible, he could be denied, dismissed as superstition. But the moment he accepts compensation, he becomes evidence, a transaction, something that can be tracked, recorded, used against you both. Then it's a gift, you say, not payment. He looks at you for a long moment, then slowly reaches out and takes the pouch. Thank you, he says. You nod, not trusting yourself to speak. He turns toward the door, then stops. The story, he says quietly. The one they're telling about the helper in the workshop. What about it? Let them tell it. Don't try to stop it anymore. You're confused. But you just said, I said I can't be a story. But the story can exist without me. He looks back at you, and for the first time, you see something almost like peace in his expression. If people believe in helpful spirits, they won't look for a real child. They'll look for magic. And magic can't be caught. It's brilliant and horrifying. He's not just leaving. He's erasing himself by letting the legend grow. Where will you go? Ask again. Somewhere the story hasn't reached yet. He opens the door, cold air rushing in. Maybe someday, when I'm old enough that no one remembers, I'll have my own workshop. I'll make shoes under my real name. I'll be visible again. And if someone asks how you learned, he smiles. It's small, sad, and utterly without illusion. I'll tell them an elf taught me. Then he's gone. The door closes. The workshop falls silent, and you're alone with the realization that you just witnessed the birth of a legend and the death of a boy. Not literally, but metaphorically, Thomas will survive. But Thomas will never exist in any record, any memory, any history book. Only the story will exist. The story of the helpful elf who appears at night to aid struggling craftsmen. The story that will travel from Salem to New York to Pennsylvania, evolving with each telling, adding elements of magic and whimsy until it becomes unrecognizable. The story that will eventually merge with Dutch folklore and German traditions and become part of American Christmas mythology. The story that will make children believe in helpful creatures who reward hard work and kindness. The story that started with trauma, survival, and a child so thoroughly erased that he had to become invisible to stay alive. You sit down at the workbench, surrounded by unfinished shoes and dying firelight, and you wonder, Is this how all legends begin? Not with magic, but with people who can't exist being turned into things that can't be real. Outside, snow begins to fall. Christmas is 2 days away. And somewhere in the darkness, a boy who never existed walks toward a future where he'll become someone else entirely. While behind him, in workshops and taverns and family gatherings, people will tell stories about the helpful elf for generations to come, never knowing his name, never knowing his face, never knowing he was real. Christmas Day, 1692. You spend it alone in the workshop, door bolted, fire low, trying not to think about where Thomas might be sleeping tonight. Outside, Salem observes the holiday with characteristic Puritan restraint. There are no decorations, no feasts, no celebration. Christmas is acknowledged but not celebrated too Catholic, too indulgent, too reminiscent of the old ways the colony worked so hard to leave behind. But inside the workshop, something is changing. You've left out bread and milk. Not for Thomas. You know he's not coming back, but because you can't quite bring yourself to stop the ritual. It feels like the only prayer you know how to say. And as you sit there in the darkness, you think about Abigail Dane's words. You're creating a story. She was right. But what she didn't tell you, what maybe she didn't know, is that once a story is created, it stops belonging to you. It becomes public property. Over the next week, you start hearing the variations. At the market, 2 women discussing the cobbler's helper. I heard it was a brownie. You know, like in Scotland. My mother's mother used to tell stories about them. No. It was a Lutzelfrau, German. They help with household tasks if you leave them porridge. Whatever it was, it's gone now. He angered it somehow. That's why his shoes are terrible again. At the blacksmith's, a group of men debating the nature of the creature. Definitely demonic. Nothing good works at night. Or angelic. A test from God. I say it was just an apprentice he kept hidden to avoid paying guild fees. That last one is closest to the truth, which is why no one believes it. At the church, Reverend Wolcott delivers a sermon about the dangers of accepting help from unknown sources, about how the devil appears in pleasing forms, about how the community must remain vigilant against deception. He doesn't mention you by name. He doesn't have to. Everyone knows who he's talking about. And slowly, incrementally, you watch as Thomas disappears beneath the weight of interpretation. He stops being a boy and becomes a symbol. A cautionary tale for some, a fairy tale for others, a theological debate for the educated, a bedtime story for children. And the real Thomas, the one who ate your bread with shaking hands, who stitched leather with his father's technique, who vanished into the December night with a pouch of coins and no future, is erased completely. You try once to correct the record. It's at the market 3 weeks after Christmas. You overhear a woman telling her daughter about the cobbler's elf, describing how it lived in the walls and sang while it worked and only asked for cream as payment. It wasn't an elf, you say, unable to stop yourself. It was. Both of them turn to look at you. The woman's expression shifts from friendly to suspicious in an instant. You're the cobbler, she says. Yes. And you're saying you know what it was? You open your mouth. Close it. Because what can you say? It was a traumatized child whose father was executed and who learned to survive by being invisible. It was an indentured servant running from a system that would have worked him to death. It was someone's son who got erased from history because acknowledging him would mean acknowledging what we did to his family. You can't say any of that. Because if you do, you make Thomas visible again. You make him catchable. You make him real in a world that's safer for him if he stays mythical. So instead you say, I don't know what it was. The woman nods, satisfied, and continues her story to her daughter, adding new details you've never heard before. You walk away. And you understand, finally, completely, what Thomas understood that last night. The story will protect him better than the truth ever could, because the truth is vulnerable. It can be questioned, investigated, prosecuted. But a story, a good story, one that fills a need, that explains something people want explained, is immortal. It spreads. It evolves. It becomes stronger than fact. And somewhere in that realization, you find a strange comfort. Thomas may be erased, but he's also protected. The legend of the helpful elf will spread across the colonies, across the ocean, across centuries. It will merge with other stories, other traditions, other beliefs. It will become part of Christmas folklore, part of children's literature, part of the cultural DNA of a nation that doesn't even exist yet. And every time someone tells it, they'll be remembering, without knowing, a boy who survived trauma by becoming invisible, a boy who turned his erasure into immortality, a boy who became a story because being real was too dangerous. You return to the workshop and sit at the bench. The leather scraps are still there. The tools are still there. The unfinished shoes are still there. But the magic is gone, and you're glad, because magic was never real. It was just survival, disguised. And now that Thomas has survived, has escaped, has vanished into whatever life he'll build for himself under whatever name he'll choose, the magic can die. The story can live. And the truth can rest. You pick up a piece of leather and begin to work. Slowly, clumsily, visibly imperfect. You make bad shoes for the rest of your life. You die in 1704, unremarkable, forgotten, buried in a grave with a marker so simple no one will ever think to preserve it. But the story? The story lives forever. And somewhere in New York or Pennsylvania or some other colony far from Salem's reach, a man who used to be named Thomas makes shoes under a different name. Good shoes, not perfect ones. He's learned to hide his skill, to be competent but not miraculous, to exist without creating legends. He survives. He marries maybe. Has children maybe. Teaches them a trade maybe. But he never tells them about Salem. Never mentions the workshop on Mill Street. Never explains where he learned to stitch leather with such precision. And when his children ask, because children always ask, he smiles and says, "An elf taught me." They laugh. They think he's joking, and he lets them think that. Because the best way to hide the truth is to make it sound like a fairy tale. And the best way to survive is to become the story instead of the person. And Thomas, whoever he becomes, whatever name he takes, whatever life he builds, understands this better than anyone. He is the first American elf, not because he was magical, but because he was invisible. And invisibility, in the right light, looks exactly like magic. Boston, 1695. 3 years after Thomas disappeared. The story has traveled. Abigail Dane is sitting in her parlor, entertaining guests. 3 women from prominent families. The kind of social obligation she endures with practiced grace. Tea is served. Gossip is exchanged. The conversation drifts, as it always does, to the strange and supernatural. Did you hear about the cobbler in Salem? One woman asks. The one with the elf? Abigail's teacup pauses halfway to her lips. I heard, she says carefully. They say the creature lived in his walls. That it would appear at midnight and complete his work in exchange for food. How quaint, another woman adds. Like something from the old country. My husband thinks it was demonic, the first woman continues. He says nothing good works in darkness. And yet, the third woman interjects. The shoes were supposed to be extraordinary, divine, even. How can something demonic create divine work? The debate continues circular, pointless, entertaining. Abigail says nothing. Because she knows the truth, or part of it. She remembers the workshop, the footprints in the dust, the boy she never saw but whose presence she deduced from evidence alone. She remembers the cobbler, Gottfried, and how terrified he looked when she confronted him. She remembers the warning she gave him. And she wonders, not for the first time, if he listened. After her guests leave, she sits alone in the parlor, watching the fire burn low. She thinks about stories, about how they spread, about how they mutate, about how they serve purposes beyond their original intent. The elf story is already becoming something else, something larger. It's no longer about a specific cobbler in a specific workshop. It's becoming archetypal, universal, a story that can happen anywhere to anyone. And that universality makes it powerful. Because once a story stops being about a specific person, it stops being evidence. It becomes folklore, and folklore can't be prosecuted. She pulls out a piece of paper and begins to write. Not a letter, not a testimony, just notes, observations, a record for herself, maybe, or for posterity. She writes about the cobbler's workshop, about the perfect boots, about the child she never saw but knew existed, about how easily people accept magic when the truth is too complicated, about how stories protect by obscuring. She writes until the fire dies and the room grows cold and her hand cramps from holding the quill. Then she folds the paper carefully and places it in a locked drawer with other documents she'll never show anyone. Because some truths are too dangerous to speak. They're too important to forget. And Abigail Dane, wealthy widow, sharp-eyed observer, keeper of uncomfortable secrets, understands something that most people in 1695 don't. History is written by the people who survive, but folklore is written by the people who need to forget. And the story of the helpful elf is not history. It's organized forgetting. It's a community agreeing, without ever saying so explicitly, to replace a traumatized child with a magical creature, to replace prosecution with wonder, to replace guilt with myth. And in doing so, they create something that will outlast all of them. Meanwhile, in New York, a man named William Cooper is building a workshop. He's in his mid-30s, weathered, competent, unremarkable. He's been in the colony for 2 years, working as a journeyman for various craftsmen, saving money, keeping his head down. No one asks about his past. In the colonies, no one's past matters as much as their present utility. He's a good worker, reliable, skilled enough to be valuable, but not so skilled that people ask questions. He never mentions Salem, never mentions his real name, never mentions the workshop where he learned his trade, or the father who taught him before the colony decided his father was a threat. William Cooper is a fiction. But fictions, when lived consistently enough, become truth. He marries a woman named Sarah. She's practical, kind, asks no probing questions. They have children, 3 of them, eventually. He teaches his eldest son the basics of leatherwork, but never the advanced techniques. Those he keeps to himself, hidden. Like a language, he can speak but chooses not to. On Christmas Eve, 1695, his son, 6 years old, curious, relentless, asks him about the holiday. Why don't we celebrate like the Dutch families? The boy asks, because we're not Dutch, but they have such lovely traditions. The gifts. The stories about Santa Claus and his helpers. William pauses, thread suspended between his fingers. What helpers? His son launches into an explanation he clearly heard from Dutch neighbors. The story of Sinterklaas, the gift giver, who travels with small companions who help him deliver presents to good children. It's not the same story as Simon's elf, but it's close enough to make William's hand shake. Father? His son asks, noticing. Are you all right? Fine, William says. Just tired, but he's not fine. Because he's realizing something that makes his chest tight and his breath shallow. The story is spreading. Not his specific story, but the archetype of it, the idea of small helpers, of mysterious assistants, of creatures who appear at night to reward the worthy. It's becoming a pattern, a template. And that template is starting to merge with other traditions, Dutch, German, English, creating something new. Something that will eventually become fundamental to how an entire continent celebrates Christmas. And at the root of it all, invisible, unacknowledged, is a boy named Thomas who learned to survive by becoming impossible. William finishes his stitching in silence. That night, after his family is asleep, he goes outside and looks at the sky. Stars. Cold. Infinite. He wonders if the cobbler Gottfried is still alive. He wonders if anyone in Salem still tells the story. He wonders if he'll ever stop feeling like a ghost in his own life. Probably not. But ghosts, he's learning, have advantages. They can move through walls. They can't be caught. And they can watch history happen from the safety of invisibility. He goes back inside, closes the door, bolts it, and sleeps the sleep of someone who knows he survived something most people don't survive. Not death. Something worse. Being erased. And then, through sheer stubbornness and strategic silence, unerasing himself. Not as Thomas, not as himself, but as someone new, someone safe, someone fictional enough to be real. New Amsterdam, soon to be New York, December 1698. The story has mutated again. It's no longer just about a cobbler's elf. It's merging with the Dutch tradition of Sinterklaas, the gift-giving bishop who visits children on December 5th. And in that merger, something new is being born. The helpers. In the original Dutch tradition, Sinterklaas traveled alone or with a single companion. But in the colonies, where Dutch settlers mix with English Puritans, German craftsmen, and Swedish traders, the traditions are colliding, fragmenting, recombining into something hybrid. And the idea of small, helpful creatures borrowed from Celtic brownies, Germanic house spirits, and yes, the story of the Salem cobbler's mysterious assistant is grafting itself onto the Sinterklaas tradition like a parasite that improves its host. Suddenly, Sinterklaas doesn't travel alone. He has helpers. Small ones, who make toys, who reward good behavior, who appear at night when children are sleeping. The details vary by household, by neighborhood, by who's telling the story. But the core concept is solidifying. Magical small helpers associated with Christmas and gift-giving. And no one remembers that this started with a traumatized child in Salem, hiding from indentured servitude and execution. The truth has been completely consumed by the myth. In a tavern in New Amsterdam, 3 men are drinking and arguing. One is Dutch, a merchant named Peter van der Meer. One is English, a ship's captain named Thomas Gray. No relation. One is German, a carpenter named Friedrich Adler. They're debating Christmas traditions, each insisting their cultural version is superior, more authentic, more meaningful. Sinterklaas is the only proper tradition, Peter insists. A bishop who rewards virtue. What could be more Christian? Too Catholic, Thomas counters. The English way is better modest observance, family prayer, no ostentatious gift-giving. Both of you are boring, Friedrich says, waving his mug dismissively. In Germany, we have proper Christmas, trees, candles, and yes, helpers, small folk who assist with preparations. Small folk? Peter leans forward, interested. Like kabouters? Similar, but these make toys, help craftsmen, appear in workshops at night. Thomas the captain snorts. That's just the Salem story. The cobbler with the mysterious helper. I heard it 5 years ago. No, Friedrich insists. This is older. From the Black Forest. My grandfather told me about it. Your grandfather was drunk. Your mother was. The argument continues, loud, pointless, lubricated by alcohol. But something important is happening here. 3 different cultural traditions are being braided together in real time. The Dutch Sinterklaas, the English restraint, the German mysticism. And underneath all of it, like a foundation no one can see, the story of a boy who never existed becoming the template for magical helpers who definitely don't exist. This is how folklore forms. Not through careful preservation of accurate history, but through drunken arguments in colonial taverns where nobody agrees on anything, except that their version is right and everyone else's is corrupted. The 3 men eventually get tired of arguing and start collaborating instead. What if, they propose, there was a way to combine the traditions? A gift giver, yes, like Sinterklaas, but with helpers like the German stories, who make toys like the mysterious craftsmen in various folktales, who come at night like ghosts, spirits, brownies, elves, and who reward children for good behavior because every tradition agrees. Children should be terrified into obedience through the promise of supernatural surveillance. It's a synthesis, a cultural compromise, a new mythology being assembled from spare parts. None of them realize they're creating the foundation of what will eventually become Santa's workshop and his elves. None of them would care if they did. They're just drunk men solving the problem of how to celebrate Christmas in a colony where everyone's traditions are different and no one wants to give ground. But the solution, they're drunkenly sketching out on the tavern table gift giver plus small helpers plus toy making plus nocturnal visitation will spread. It will be repeated, embellished, standardized, and in 200 years, it will be so thoroughly absorbed into American culture that people will think it's ancient, traditional, timeless, when in reality, it was invented in 1698 in a tavern in New Amsterdam by 3 drunk men who couldn't agree on anything except that magical helpers were a good addition to Christmas. Back in his workshop, William Cooper, formerly Thomas, hears about the evolving tradition from a Dutch customer. They're saying Sinterklaas has little helpers now. The customer mentions casually while picking up his repaired boots. Creatures that make toys. You ever hear of such a thing? William's hands don't shake. He's had years of practice. No, he says. Sounds like nonsense. Probably, the customer agrees. But it's a charming nonsense. My children love the idea. He pays and leaves. William sits down at his workbench, alone, feeling the weight of something he can't name. Pride? Horror? Disbelief. He's watching himself become a fairy tale. Not him specifically, but the shape of him, the outline of his survival. It's being absorbed into something larger, something communal, something that has nothing to do with him anymore, and everything to do with what people need to believe. They need to believe in helpful creatures, in magic that rewards work, in invisible assistance that makes impossible tasks possible. They need to believe this because life in the colonies is brutal, and Christmas is one of the few moments where they allow themselves to imagine something better. And if that imagination requires inventing magical helpers, so be it. The truth that the helper was a traumatized child is too ugly, too complicated, too much like the reality they're already living, so they choose the myth. And William, sitting in his workshop in New York, making mediocre shoes under a fake name, understands that he's watching his own erasure become complete. Thomas is gone. The cobbler's elf remains. And from that elf, a whole mythology will grow. A mythology that will eventually include workshops at the North Pole and lists of good children and flying reindeer and all the elaborate infrastructure of industrial-scale gift distribution. None of it real. All of it believed. And at the center of it, invisible, erased, immortal. A boy who learned to survive by becoming impossible. William stands up, walks to the window, looks out at the street. Children are playing in the snow. They're pretending, acting out some game he can't quite follow. One of them is clearly meant to be Sinterklaas. The others are his helpers. Small, quick, imaginary. He watches them play. And for the first time in years, he smiles. Not because it's funny, but because he's realized something. He won. Not by fighting, not by revealing the truth, but by becoming a story so pervasive that the truth can't touch it. He's untouchable now. Not as William Cooper, not as Thomas, but as the elf. The myth, the legend that will outlive everyone who knew him. And there's a strange, dark victory in that. He survived by disappearing. And his disappearance became the most visible thing about him, forever. Philadelphia, 1702. The story has reached children. This is when it becomes permanent. Because adults can debate folklore, question traditions, remember the real version. But children? Children absorb stories like gospel. They don't question. They don't critique. They believe. And once children believe, the story becomes multi-generational. A woman named Margaret Whitfield is putting her daughter to bed. The girl, 7 years old, clever, persistent, asks why they don't have as many presents as the Dutch children down the street. Because we're not Dutch, Margaret explains, tired, repeating the same conversation her own mother had with her. But the Dutch children say Sinterklaas has helpers. Little people who make toys all year. Why can't we have helpers? Margaret pauses. She's heard the stories. The evolving tradition. The grafting of various folkloric elements onto the Christmas celebration. And she makes a decision that will ripple forward for centuries. Instead of saying no, instead of dismissing it as foreign superstition, she says, "We do have helpers." Her daughter's eyes go wide. "We do?" "Of course. But they're invisible. They only appear when children are asleep." "What do they look like?" Margaret improvises, pulling from half-remembered stories, Dutch traditions, German folklore, and her own imagination. "They're small," she says, "with pointed ears and quick hands. They live in workshops where they make toys all year round. And at Christmas, they help deliver them to good children." "What about bad children?" "Bad children get nothing. It's a threat wrapped in whimsy. A behavioral control system disguised as magic. And it works." Her daughter's behavior improves dramatically. Margaret mentions this to other mothers. They adopt the same strategy. Within a year, half the households in Philadelphia are telling their children about the invisible helpers who watch, judge, and reward. The mythology deepens. The helpers get names now, different in each household, but the concept is standardizing. Small, magical, workshop-dwelling creatures associated with Christmas and toy-making. And because children are involved, the story gets sweeter. The edges get sanded down. The trauma that birthed it, the dead father, the executed cordwainer, the child hiding in workshops to survive, vanishes completely. What remains is pure, sanitized, marketable magic. Helpful elves, cheerful craftsmen, selfless gift-givers who ask nothing in return except good behavior from children. It's a lie, but it's a beautiful lie. And beauty, in folklore, trumps truth every time. By 1710, the story had spread to every major colonial city. Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Charleston. Each city has its own version, its own details, but the core concept is identical. Small magical helpers associated with Christmas. The theology varies. Puritans insist the helpers are angels. Dutch Reformed believers think they're blessed spirits. German Lutherans connect them to house spirits from the old country. Catholics are suspicious, but don't reject them outright. But everyone agrees they exist. Or rather, everyone agrees to pretend they exist, because the pretense serves a purpose. It makes Christmas more magical for children. It provides a behavioral control mechanism for parents, It creates a shared cultural touchstone in a colony where people from different countries, different religions, different traditions are trying to build something cohesive. The helpers become social glue. And in that process, they become real. Not literally, but functionally. Because if everyone believes in something, if everyone acts as if it's true, if everyone shapes their behavior around it, then in every way that matters, it is true. The philosopher Bishop Berkeley would later argue that things exist because they're perceived. The Christmas helpers prove him right. They exist because children believe in them, and children believe in them because adults need them to. In a small schoolhouse in Boston, a teacher named Abigail Porter, no relation to Abigail Dane, though the name is common enough, is trying to control a classroom of restless children 3 days before Christmas. They're not listening. They're distracted, excited, vibrating with anticipation. So she makes a decision. "Settle down," she says, "or the Christmas helpers will hear you." Instant silence. 20 pairs of eyes lock onto her. "The helpers are watching right now," she continues, improvising wildly. "They're invisible, but they're here. In the corners, in the rafters, watching to see who deserves toys and who deserves coal." One brave child raises his hand. "Coal? Yes. Bad children get coal. Everyone knows that." She has no idea where this detail came from. Maybe German tradition. Maybe she invented it on the spot. It doesn't matter. Within a week, every child in Boston knows that bad children get coal. Within a month, it spread to 3 other cities. Within a year, it's doctrine. This is how folklore solidifies. Through repetition, through children, through the desperate improvisations of exhausted adults trying to maintain order. And the coal detail is genius, because it's not just punishment, it's symbolic. Coal is what you use to heat homes, to survive winter. So bad children get survival. They get the bare minimum. They don't freeze, but they don't get joy. It's cruel enough to terrify without being traumatizing. Perfect. The helpers are no longer just toy makers. They're judges, surveillance systems, moral arbiters who see everything and deliver proportional consequences. It's brilliant social engineering wrapped in whimsy. And it works so well that within a generation, no one remembers it was invented. It feels ancient, traditional, eternal, the way all good lies eventually feel. Somewhere in Pennsylvania, William Cooper receives a letter. It's from his eldest son, now 23, who's moved to Maryland to start his own workshop. The letter is mostly business descriptions of customers, accounts, expenses. But at the end, there's a postscript. The strangest thing happened last week. A customer's child asked if I had Christmas helpers in my workshop. When I asked what she meant, she described small magical creatures that make toys at night. She seemed disappointed when I told her I work alone. "Father, have you heard of this tradition?" It seems to be everywhere suddenly. William reads the letter 3 times. Then he folds it carefully and places it in a drawer with other documents he'll never show anyone. He thinks about responding, about telling his son the truth, that the tradition his customer's child believes in started with him, that the Christmas helpers are based on a traumatized boy who learned to survive by hiding in workshops, that the entire mythology is built on erasure and trauma and the desperate need to turn horror into wonder. But he doesn't, because what would be the point? His son wouldn't believe him. No one would. The story is too big now, too established, too useful. And the truth, the real truth, about Salem and executions and a boy named Thomas who stopped existing, is too ugly to compete with the magic people have chosen to believe instead. So William writes a response that says nothing important. He asks about inventory. He gives advice about leather suppliers. He mentions the weather. And he signs it Father instead of William, because even that name is a lie, And what's one more lie when you're built entirely from them? He seals the letter, posts it, and goes back to work, making mediocre shoes, living a mediocre life, being unremarkable, invisible, safe. While the story of what he was, or rather, what people think he was, grows larger, louder, more elaborate with each passing year. Christmas Eve, 1715. William is 61 years old. He's outlived most people born in his generation. He's outlived his wife, his trade, his usefulness. He sits in his workshop smaller now, quieter, mostly empty except for memories and dust. Outside, he can hear children singing. It's a new tradition, apparently. Christmas carols. Songs about joy and miracles, and yes, about helpers who come in the night to reward good children. One of the songs mentions elves specifically. The word makes him flinch. Elves, not brownies, not house spirits, not helpers. Elves. The word is wrong. Too fantastical. Too removed from the reality it's supposed to represent. But it's catchy, and catchy beats accurate every time. He listens to the children sing, their voices bright and confident, absolutely certain that somewhere in the world, magical creatures are making toys for them. And he thinks, I should be angry. He thinks, I should be bitter that my survival has been turned into entertainment. He thinks, I should rage against the erasure, the simplification, the commodification of my trauma. But he doesn't feel any of that. He just feels tired. And strangely, unexpectedly, grateful. Because the lie protected him. The myth gave him space to survive. The story created enough distance between Thomas and William that he was able to live a full life mediocre. Yes, but full. He married. He had children. He taught his trade. He died slowly instead of violently. And that's more than most trauma survivors get. So he listens to the children sing about elves. And he smiles. Not because it's true, but because it's true enough. And sometimes, truth enough is all you get. He dies 3 months later. Quietly. Unremarkably. There's a small funeral. His remaining family attends. A few neighbors. A pastor who gives a generic sermon about a life well lived. No one mentions Salem. No one mentions Thomas. No one mentions that this quiet, unremarkable man was the foundation of a mythology that's now spreading across the Atlantic, back to Europe, merging with other traditions, growing into something that will eventually become fundamental to Western childhood. William Cooper is buried in an unmarked grave. His name will be forgotten within 2 generations. But the story? The story is just beginning. Because myths don't die with their origins. They outlive them. They devour them. They turn them into fuel for something bigger, stranger, more durable than truth. And the story of the Christmas elves, the helpful, magical, invisible creatures who make toys and judge children and reward goodness, will spread. It will evolve. It will absorb new details from Scandinavian folklore, from British fairy tales, from German Hausgeists, from American commercialism. It will become the workshop at the North Pole. It will become Santa's helpers. It will become a multi-billion-dollar industry. It will become so thoroughly embedded in Western culture that questioning it feels like attacking childhood itself. And at the root of all of it, buried so deep no one will ever find him, is a boy named Thomas who learned that the best way to survive is to become impossible, to turn your trauma into myth, your erasure into immortality, your silence into a story so loud it drowns out everything else. William Cooper Thomas does, knowing this. And in his last moments, as his breathing slows and the world fades to gray, he thinks, I won. Not by fighting, not by revealing, but by disappearing so completely that I became everyone. And that's the final irony, the final twist. The thing that makes this story both tragic and triumphant. Thomas didn't become famous. He became ubiquitous, not a person, a pattern, not a memory, a myth. And myths are forever. London, 1730. The story comes home. Not to Salem, that would make too much sense. No, the story returns to Europe through trade routes, sailors' tales, colonial correspondence. It arrives fragmented, distorted, barely recognizable from its origin, but it arrives. A British publisher named Edmund Hartley is compiling a book of colonial curiosities, strange customs, unusual traditions, the exotic practices of England's overseas subjects. He's heard about the American Christmas helpers and finds the concept delightfully primitive. The colonials, he writes in his notes, have created a charming mythology of small craftsmen who assist with Christmas preparations. One suspects it derives from Germanic house spirits, filtered through Dutch Sinterklaas traditions and simplified for the colonial mind. He's wrong about the origin, but he's right about the synthesis. Hartley includes a chapter on Christmas spirits of the New World in his book. He describes the helpers as diminutive creatures of uncertain theological status, generally benevolent, associated with toy-making and gift-giving. He invents details to make the story more palatable for British readers. He gives them workshops. He gives them uniforms green. He decides, because red is too associated with Catholicism. He gives them a hierarchy master craftsmen and apprentices, because British readers understand class structure. The book is published in 1732. It sells moderately well, but more importantly, it's read by other writers, by folklorists, by parents looking for new stories to tell their children. And slowly, incrementally, the American Christmas helpers begin their reverse colonization of Europe. They merge with existing traditions. In England, they absorb elements of fairy lore, mischievous, capricious, bound by strange rules. In Germany, they reconnect with Hausgeist traditions, domestic spirits, tied to specific places, demanding specific offerings. In Scandinavia, they encounter the Nis and Topthouse gnomes who help farmers and punish laziness. Each culture takes the basic concept, small magical helpers associated with Christmas, and adapts it to local belief. The result is a pan-European mythology that feels both ancient and new, traditional and innovative, local and universal. And no one remembers that it started with a traumatized child in Salem hiding from execution. The origin is completely obscured, replaced by a dozen competing theories, all plausible, none accurate. Some scholars claim the helpers derive from Norse mythology. Others insist they're Celtic in origin. A few argue they're medieval, connected to guild traditions and apprenticeship systems. They're all wrong. But their wrongness doesn't matter, because the story has achieved critical mass. It's become too big to fact-check, too embedded to excavate, too useful to abandon. In a small village in Bavaria, a woodcarver named Hans Richter is telling his grandchildren about the Weihnachtswichtel Christmas helpers. He describes them as small men who live in the forest and emerge at Christmas to assist toy makers. He says they demand respect, payment in the form of porridge and beer, and absolute secrecy. If you tell anyone you've seen them, he warns, they'll never help you again. His grandchildren nod solemnly, believing every word. What Hans doesn't mention, because he doesn't know, is that this story didn't exist when he was a child. He learned it from a book he bought from a traveling merchant 5 years ago. A book translated from English. A book based on American colonial traditions. But he's absorbed it so thoroughly, merged it so completely with local folklore, that he genuinely believes it's ancient. That's how cultural transmission works. Stories don't spread with citations. They spread with conviction. And Hans tells the story with absolute conviction because it serves his purpose. It makes his grandchildren behave. It adds magic to Christmas. And it connects him to something larger than himself. The fact that it's based on a lie about a boy who never existed. Irrelevant, because the story is real now. Real in the way that matters. Real because people believe it. Real because it changes behavior. Real because it's been absorbed into the collective imagination so thoroughly that questioning it feels like attacking tradition itself. Meanwhile, in Philadelphia, a printer named Benjamin Franklin. Yes, that Benjamin Franklin is producing an almanac. He includes a section on Christmas traditions. Among them, a brief mention of the helpful sprites that assist Christian families during the sacred season. He doesn't elaborate. He doesn't need to. By 1745, the concept is so widespread that a single sentence is sufficient. Everyone knows what he's talking about. Franklin himself is skeptical of supernatural claims. He suspects the sprites are either folklore or cover stories for human assistance. But he includes them in his almanac because they're culturally relevant and his readers expect it. This is the moment the story achieves legitimacy. When Benjamin Franklin, scientist, skeptic, founder, casually includes Christmas helpers in a publication meant to educate and inform, the story crosses from folklore into accepted fact. Not scientific fact, cultural fact, which is often more powerful, because scientific facts can be disproven. But cultural facts become infrastructure. They become the assumptions underlying everything else. They become invisible precisely because they're so fundamental. And the Christmas helpers are now fundamental. They're part of how Western culture understands Christmas. Part of how parents manage children. Part of how communities celebrate. Part of the cognitive architecture of the season. Invisible, ubiquitous, unquestioned. Exactly like Thomas intended. In 1750, a German immigrant in Pennsylvania writes a letter to his brother back in Württemberg. He describes his new life in the colonies, the opportunities, the challenges, the strangeness of living in a place where multiple cultures collide and create hybrid traditions. The Christmas here is different. He writes, "They have taken our traditions and mixed them with English and Dutch customs. The result is something new. They speak of helpers, Kleinhelfer, who make toys for children. It reminds me of the stories Großmutter used to tell, but different. More Americanish." He struggles to articulate the difference, because the difference isn't in the details. It's in the function. European house spirits were bound to specific locations. They served families, bloodlines, ancestral homes. But American Christmas helpers are portable, universal, democratized. They don't belong to aristocratic families with multi-generational estates. They belong to everyone, every child, every household, every workshop. It's the same mythology, adapted for a mobile population in a new world where tradition has to be invented because nothing is ancestral yet. And that portability, that universality, is what makes the American version so powerful, so exportable, so viral. Because you don't need the right bloodline to access Christmas magic. You don't need the right address. You just need to believe. And belief in America is democratic. Available to anyone willing to participate in the collective fiction. By 1760, the story has completed its Atlantic crossing. It exists simultaneously in America and Europe, in dozens of variations, speaking dozens of languages, serving dozens of purposes. But the core concept remains stable. Small magical helpers, associated with Christmas. Reward good behavior. Make toys. Invisible. And at the center of it all, completely erased, is a boy who learned to survive by becoming a story. Not because he wanted to be a story, but because being real was too dangerous. And now, 70 years after his death, his strategy has proven so successful that the entire Western world has adopted it. They've all learned to survive through strategic mythology, to prefer magic over truth, to choose wonder over reality, to believe in helpful elves because the alternative acknowledging the trauma, violence, and erasure that produced them is too uncomfortable. So they don't. They just celebrate. They just tell stories. They just pass the mythology to their children, who pass it to their children, who pass it to their children, until no one remembers, until everyone believes, until the lie becomes the truth, and the truth becomes unspeakable. Manchester, England, 1840. Everything changes. The Industrial Revolution doesn't just transform production, it transforms mythology. Suddenly, toy making isn't a craft, it's an industry. Factories replace workshops. Machines replace artisans. Mass production replaces individual creation. And the story of the Christmas helpers has to adapt. A factory owner named Charles Pemberton is facing a problem. His toy factory employs 200 workers, mostly children, working 14-hour shifts in conditions that would make Thomas's Salem workshop look like paradise. They're exhausted. They're angry. They're starting to organize. Pemberton needs a narrative that makes their suffering meaningful. That frames their exploitation as contribution. That turns brutal labor into magical purpose. So he tells them a story. He gathers his workers, children as young as 7, faces gaunt, hands scarred, and explains that they're not just making toys. They're Christmas helpers, real ones. They're the elves that children all over England believe in. They're the magical workforce that makes Christmas possible. You should be proud, he tells them. You're creating wonder. It's a lie. An offensive, cruel, calculated lie, but it works. Because humans will endure almost anything if you give them a narrative that makes the suffering meaningful. The children work harder. They complain less. They've been given a role in a story bigger than themselves, and that story transforms their exploitation into noble sacrifice. Pemberton doubles his profits within 2 years. Other factory owners notice. Within a decade, every major toy manufacturer in England is using some variation of the Christmas helper narrative to motivate workers and justify conditions. The elves have been industrialized, commodified, turned from folklore into management strategy. And in the process, something interesting happens. The mythology grows more elaborate, because industrial production requires industrial infrastructure. You can't just have helpers working in scattered workshops anymore. You need centralized production, organization, hierarchy, so the folklore adapts. The helpers get a headquarters, a workshop at the North Pole, far from human civilization, where they work year-round producing toys. They get a manager, Santa Claus himself, evolved from Sinterklaas, from Father Christmas, from half a dozen gift-giving figures merged into one. They get uniforms, standardized appearances, specific roles. They stop being house spirits and become factory workers. Cheerful, tireless, uncomplaining factory workers who labor joyfully in service of a benevolent master. It's a capitalist's fever dream, and it becomes the dominant version of the mythology. New York City, 1860. A writer named Louisa May Alcott is working on a Christmas story for a children's magazine. She includes a scene where children speculate about Santa's helpers. Tiny men in green, she writes, who work all year to make toys for good children. The description is casual, almost throwaway, but it's published in a magazine with a circulation of 50,000. And suddenly, the details start to standardize. Green clothing, pointed ears, workshop at the North Pole, toy making year-round. Other writers pick up the details. They add their own embellishments. The helpers get names now, not individual names, but categories. Elves. Always elves. The word is stuck, pushed out brownies, sprites, witch-tell, all the other regional variations. Elves. It sounds more fantastical, more whimsical, more marketable. And marketable matters because something else is happening. Christmas is being commercialized. Department stores are using the holiday to drive sales. They're creating elaborate window displays featuring Santa and his helpers. They're hiring actors to dress as elves and entertain children while parents shop. The mythology is becoming profitable, and profit stabilizes mythology faster than tradition ever could. Because tradition can vary by region, by family, by telling, but profit requires standardization. If you're manufacturing elf decorations, you need everyone to agree on what elves look like. If you're selling Christmas cards, you need everyone to accept the same narrative. If you're building a department store Santa display, you need the story to be recognizable, consistent, universal, so the variations die off. The regional differences fade. What remains is a single, standardized version. Santa Claus, the jolly gift giver. His workshop at the North Pole. His army of elves who make toys year-round. His surveillance of children's behavior. His Christmas Eve delivery system. It's elaborate. It's absurd. It requires believing in magic, flying reindeer, time manipulation, and global logistics that would bankrupt Amazon. But it works, because it's not about believability. It's about consensus. And by 1870, Western culture has reached consensus. This is the story. This is Christmas. And anyone who questions it is attacking childhood itself. Somewhere in Pennsylvania, a historian is researching colonial folk traditions. He's heard rumors about the origin of the Christmas elf mythology, something about a cobbler in Salem, a mysterious helper, a story that spread through the colonies in the late 1600s. He tries to verify it. He checks Salem's records from 1692. He finds nothing. No mention of a cobbler with supernatural assistance. No reports of mysterious toy-making. No evidence of anything unusual except the witch trials, which are well documented and thoroughly explained. He checks other colonial archives. Still nothing. The earliest written references to Christmas helpers date from the 1730s, and they're already describing an established tradition with unclear origins. The historian writes in his notes, "The elf mythology appears to have emerged organically from a synthesis of European folk traditions adapted to American colonial life. No single origin point can be identified." He's wrong, but he can't know that, because Thomas was erased so thoroughly that not even his erasure left traces. The historian publishes his findings. They're cited by other scholars. The organic synthesis theory becomes academic consensus. And the truth that the entire mythology started with a traumatized child hiding in a workshop in Salem is buried so deep it becomes archaeologically inaccessible. Not because of conspiracy, not because of cover-up, simply because Thomas was so successful at disappearing that even his disappearance disappeared. The story explodes. In 1902, L. Frank Baum writes The Life and Adventures of Santa Claus, standardizing the elf mythology in print. In 1923, Yes, Virginia, There's a Santa Claus becomes a cultural touchstone, cementing the idea that believing in Christmas magic is virtuous. In 1949, Gene Autry records Rudolph, the Red-Nosed Reindeer, expanding the mythology with new characters, new market opportunities. In 1964, the Rankin-based stop-motion special, Rudolph, introduces Hermie, the elf who wants to be a dentist, the first elf with personality, with desires, with an actual character arc. And suddenly, elves aren't just background decoration. They're characters, individuals. They have names, motivations, conflicts, dreams. The mythology has evolved from folklore to industrial narrative to character-driven fiction. And with that evolution comes something unexpected. The elves develop agency. They start appearing in stories where they're not just helpers. They're protagonists. They have problems. They go on strike in some versions. They question the system. They want more than just toy making. It's inadvertently radical. Because if you give your metaphorical workforce individual personalities and desires, eventually they start demanding rights. The 2003 film Elf takes this to its logical conclusion. An elf who doesn't fit the system, who questions the rules, who ultimately leaves the North Pole to find meaning elsewhere. It's a movie about workers' rights disguised as a Christmas comedy. And audiences love it because it taps into something real. The feeling that there's more to life than being a cheerful cog in someone else's machine. Which brings us full circle to Thomas, because that's what he knew in 1692. That survival sometimes means playing your role perfectly. And escape sometimes means becoming someone else entirely. The modern elf mythology has absorbed this wisdom without knowing it. Elves are trapped workers who sometimes escape. They're invisible laborers who sometimes become visible. They're collectively erased individuals who sometimes demand individuality. They're Thomas, multiplied by millions, living out variations of his story in every Christmas special, every department store display, every children's book. None of them know they're him, but they are. December 24th, 2024. A child in Ohio asks her mother a question. Are elves real? Her mother pauses. She could say no, tell the truth, end the magic, prepare her daughter for a world without wonder. But instead, she says, "What do you think?" The child considers this seriously. "I think they're real," she says finally. "Because someone has to make all the toys." Her mother smiles, not because it's true, but because it's the right answer. The answer that preserves magic. That maintains consensus. That keeps the mythology alive for one more generation. And somewhere nowhere, Thomas smiles too. Not because he's watching. He's been dead for 300 years, but because his strategy worked. He survived by becoming impossible. And impossibility, it turns out, is the most durable form of existence. More permanent than stone. More lasting than memory. More real than reality. Because impossibility can't be disproven. It can only be believed or dismissed. And humanity, given the choice, almost always chooses belief. The story never ends. That's the thing about mythology. It doesn't conclude. It cycles. It returns. It reinvents itself for every generation while maintaining the same essential core. And the core of the Christmas elf mythology: invisible labor, magical assistance, the belief that goodness will be rewarded by unseen helpers, remains intact. Because humans need this story. We need to believe that hard work is noticed, that struggle is witnessed, that somewhere, someone is keeping track and will eventually deliver compensation for our suffering. It's not true, but it's necessary. And the Christmas elves, those impossible, ubiquitous, infinitely adaptable creatures, embody that necessary lie better than almost any other mythology. They work tirelessly and ask nothing. They watch invisibly and judge fairly. They reward virtue and ignore vice. They make the impossible possible. They are, in other words, what we wish the universe was: attentive, moral, generous, magical. And we teach this mythology to children, not because we're cruel, but because we're desperate. Desperate for them to believe in goodness. Desperate for them to behave. Desperate for them to have something we didn't. Certainty that the universe cares. Salem, Massachusetts, present day. The city has long since moved past the witch trials. Their tourism now historical curiosity, cautionary tale, source of revenue. No one remembers the cobbler on Mill Street. The workshop is gone. The records are gone. Even the street itself has been renamed twice. There's no plaque, no memorial, no acknowledgement that something important happened here. Because nothing important did happen here. Just a traumatized child hiding in a workshop. Just a mediocre cobbler making a choice to help instead of report. Just a story that spread because people needed it to spread. Unremarkable, forgotten, erased. But at the Salem Witch Museum, there's a Christmas display. Ironic, given the history. And in that display, among the representations of colonial life and winter traditions, there's a small figurine, an elf in green, holding a toy. The placard reads, "Colonial Christmas traditions merged European folklore with New World experiences, creating new mythologies that persist today." It's accurate. And completely wrong, because it frames the mythology as natural evolution, as organic cultural synthesis, when in reality, it was trauma converted to folklore to avoid acknowledging what the community had done. But no one will ever know that. The trail is too cold. The erasure too complete. Thomas William, whoever he became, is gone. Not just dead, but historically non-existent. A ghost who left no body. A story that consumed its own origin. But here's the thing. He won anyway. Because while Thomas the person is erased, Thomas the pattern is eternal. Every story about workers organizing is Thomas. Every narrative about invisible labor is Thomas. Every child who learns they can survive by becoming someone else is Thomas. Every immigrant who changes their name is Thomas. Every trauma survivor who learns to hide in plain sight is Thomas. Every story about helpful creatures who ask nothing in return is Thomas. He's not in the mythology. He is the mythology. Not the details, the structure. Not the elf, the erasure. Not the magic. The survival strategy. And that makes him more real than history ever could. Because history is about specific people in specific places doing specific things. But mythology is about patterns that repeat. And Thomas's patterns survive by disappearing. Protect yourself by becoming impossible. Turn trauma into wonder so no one has to look at it directly repeats constantly. Every Christmas. Every display. Every time a parent tells their child about elves. They're invoking Thomas without knowing it. They're practicing his survival strategy. They're proving that invisibility, properly executed, is indistinguishable from immortality. So here we are, the end of the story. Except it's not the end, because the story continues. Right now, somewhere, a child is learning about Christmas elves for the first time. Eyes wide, belief instant, magic accepted without question. And that child is learning something Thomas knew in 1692, that sometimes the best way to survive is to become a story. That invisibility is a superpower. That trauma can be transformed into myth if you're clever enough. That the truth is optional, but the story is mandatory. And that's the final lesson. The final gift from a boy who died 300 years ago under a name that wasn't his own. Not magic, not wonder, but strategy. The knowledge that you can be erased and still win. That you can disappear and still matter. That you can become impossible and still be real. In fact, sometimes becoming impossible is the only way to stay real, because reality is vulnerable. Reality can be prosecuted. Reality can be hanged in a town square while crowds watch. But impossibility? Impossibility is untouchable. You can't hang a myth. You can't prosecute a legend. You can't execute a story. You can only tell it, again, and again, and again, until everyone has forgotten why it started. Until no one remembers it was ever real. Until a lie becomes truth and the truth becomes unspeakable. And so we arrive at Christmas Eve every year in every Western nation, in millions of homes. Parents telling children about elves. Children believing with the pure, absolute faith that only children possess. The mythology perpetuating itself. Not because it's true, but because it's useful. Because it makes Christmas magical. Because it controls behavior. Because it creates shared culture. because it gives us something to believe in that's better than reality. And somewhere in that web of belief, invisible, eternal, impossible to find but impossible to erase, is Thomas. The boy who learned to survive by becoming invisible. The cobbler's helper who never existed. The first American elf. Not because he was magical, but because he was desperate. Not because he wanted immortality, but because he needed to disappear. Not because he chose to become a legend, but because being real was too dangerous. And that desperation, that need, that survival strategy, it created something that outlived him by centuries. Something that will outlive all of us. The story of the helpful elf, born in trauma, raised in silence, perfected through erasure, and celebrated every December by millions of people who have no idea what they're really celebrating. Not magic, survival, not wonder, strategy, not Christmas elves. Thomas. Always Thomas. Forever Thomas. The boy who became impossible so he could stay alive, and in doing so, became more real than reality itself. The end, or rather the continuation, because the story never ends. It just waits for next Christmas, when we'll tell it again, believing every word, forgetting every truth, exactly as Thomas intended.